In the days before reliable elevators, the upper floors of buildings were not exactly coveted spaces. Many were used for servants' quarters, storage, or for bulky mechanical equipment. Walk-up apartments on the top floor meant climbing stairs every day, which made living at altitude less than appealing. All that began to change once safety elevators became standard, and steel frame construction allowed architects to build taller structures in places like New York City and Chicago. Suddenly, a building's highest floors could be reached with ease, offering more light, better views, and the refreshing breezes that waft above urban congestion. The first proof of concept came in the form of a luxury apartment building at 998 Fifth Avenue in Manhattan. The 12-story building was designed by architects McKim, Mead and White and completed in 1912. While these were not true penthouses, they were meant to attract the wealthiest residents of Manhattan with the promise that they could have an entire floor to themselves, essentially replacing the vertical townhouses that they were used to. The building didn't quite pan out that way, with several of the floors being split up for multiple apartments, which were later expanded into single penthouses. But either way, New York City quickly became the testing ground for this new kind of apartment, often dubbed a penthouse, adapted from a term once used for a small rooftop outbuilding. By the 1920s, the word penthouse had come to mean a luxurious home right at the top of a high-rise, usually complete with a private terrace or garden. At first, these were seen as bold experiments. After all, apartment living had never been thought of as glamorous by wealthy elite, who often favored grand townhouses or mansions. But shifting social attitudes and the promise of fresh air and privacy made the idea of a chic apartment in the sky far more appealing, particularly during the Roaring '20s. Arguably, the first penthouse was completed in 1925 for Conde Nast, a man who revolutionized magazine publishing. Born in 1873, Nast made his fortune through publications like Vogue, Vanity Fair, and eventually The New Yorker. Yet his status wasn't secured merely by his business success, it also came from how he entertained the very people he wished to appear in his pages. And no address was more closely tied to these lavish soirées than the sumptuous duplex he had designed to his exacting standards in Manhattan. Before he moved into 1040 Park Avenue, Nast was already gaining a reputation for hosting small but lively gatherings at his former residence on 470 Park. Once Prohibition went into effect in 1920, most of the country had to improvise their cocktail hour, but Nast seemed unfazed by these dry times. Working with his capable secretaries, Mary Campbell and Estelle Moore, he managed to secure a seemingly endless supply of French champagne and spirits. If one arrived at a Nast affair, it meant crossing a hidden threshold, an elevator password was often required, and finding bathtubs filled with every conceivable variety of beverage. According to his friends like Diana Vreeland, there was palpable excitement that came with imbibing in secret. People partied with extra gusto simply because they weren't supposed to. Nast had purchased an entire penthouse at 1040 Park Avenue before the building was even completed. He envisioned a sprawling 30-room duplex with major modifications executed by architectural firm Delano and Aldrich. Determined to outdo anything New York had ever seen, he enlisted the celebrated interior decorator Elsie de Wolfe, often referred to as Lady Mendel, to bring a French-inflected grandeur to his new home. De Wolfe obliged, adorning the 10-room rooftop level with Louis XV furniture upholstered in pale damask, savonnerie rugs that lent a soft glow to the floors, and a dramatic sweep of 18th-century Qianlong wallpaper imported from an English estate. It was all so ornate that in summer, with no air conditioning to temper the heat, the breeze of the rooftops had to serve as the only form of cooling, but even that seemed to add to the apartment's mystique. Nast officially unveiled his penthouse on January 18th of 1925 with a dinner dance that became the talk of the town. He left nothing to chance, from the carefully set tables in his conservatory to the orchestral cues timed for the moment the first elevator guest stepped in. Every detail bore the mark of his perfectionism. At these large parties, once the clinking of glasses reached its peak, Nast was known to quietly slip away to his library for a game of bridge. He seemed to prefer savoring the success of these gatherings from a comfortable distance. In the same year that he pioneered his new idea of penthouse living, in 1925, the George Fuller Construction Company embarked on a project that would forever change the landscape of Fifth Avenue and the concept of urban living, the creation of a 14-story apartment house at 1107 Fifth Avenue. This venture, however, hinged on a pivotal agreement with General Foods heiress Marjorie Merriweather Post Hutton, the owner of the Burton Mansion that occupied the site that Fuller had his eyes on. By this time, Manhattan had shifted from a land of palatial limestone mansions to office buildings. As the city grew exponentially, the land that sat below these grand estates became too valuable for any one family to occupy. Instead of turning people away for the suburbs, the demand to live in the city was too high. Developers began purchasing grand Gilded Age mansions and tearing them down to build high-rises, and caught up in the middle of all of it was America's wealthiest woman. Marjorie, a woman of exquisite taste with a penchant for grandeur, was not one to relinquish her beloved mansion easily. She struck a deal with Fuller, her approval for the project in exchange for a palatial residence atop the new building. Her demands were precise and lavish, a recreation of her 54-room mansion spread across the top 3 floors, complete with a private porte-cochere and an exclusive lobby, ensuring the privacy and luxury she was accustomed to. The penthouse, completed in 1927, was a marvel of its time. It boasted a wraparound terrace on the highest floor, 12 wood-burning fireplaces, 17 bathrooms, and 2 kitchens, including a butler's pantry and a larder. Let's begin exploring the penthouse by opening the doors to Marjorie's private ground-level lobby, where her own concierge would open the doors for her. In the winter months, she would unload her coat by the fireplace and make her way over to her own private elevator. The elevator was finished out with gilded wall panels, allowing her to travel to her penthouse in style. Once she made it to the top of the building, her full-time staff would swing open the mirrored doors to the left of the grand staircase, welcoming her into the foyer. Though if she had friends visiting, they would make their way from a separate elevator lobby through the smaller door below the marble staircase. The massive foyer was decorated with antiques from her previous mansion, though all the furnishings could be cleared out and the space used as a ballroom, making room for hundreds of guests. Following the rounded walls with fluted pilasters framing antique European tapestries, we will find the entrances to both the men's and women's cloakrooms, where the butler would check guests' coats and bags. At the end of the night, they would present a bronze ticket to the butler to have him retrieve their belongings. This over-the-top and lavish lifestyle continues into the drawing room. To gain a better sense of this space and the parties that were hosted here, we can see Marjorie's ball gown spilling over a settee, making a statement to her guest. It was finished out with crystal chandeliers, wood paneling, and windows that look out over all of New York City. Across the foyer from the drawing room, the dining room played host to some of the most exclusive dinner parties ever known by Manhattan. Not only was it finished out with rich wood paneling that had been salvaged from a European manor house, the fireplace and mantel had been carefully removed from her former mansion and reassembled in their entirety. For more casual meals, Marjorie could wind her way behind closed doors. This brings us to a hallway, seldom seen by guests, which connects us to the breakfast room. The breakfast room was said to be Marjorie's favorite room in the house, with a large bay window crafted from bronze and leaded glass looking out over flowers dotting the New York City skyline. Another room offering incredible views was the library looking west over Central Park. Similarly to the dining room, the library had been rebuilt in its entirety from the library in her former mansion. It was decorated with portraits of significant historical figures with Americana strewn about the room. Aside from centuries-old paintings, the portrait above the fireplace was Marjorie's favorite. It depicted her 2 daughters and their cherished family dogs. We can now begin making our way upstairs, noting the arrangement of the penthouse's second level, with live-in staff occupying nearly a quarter of the space. Arriving at the second-floor stair landing, sunlight pours through a massive skylight overhead. We can peek into one of the many decadent guest rooms furnished and decorated with only the most fashionable choices of the day. Next we'll peer into Marjorie's husband's bedroom, where Mr. E.F. Hutton would sleep separate from his wife, as was customary for the time. But the largest and most opulent bedroom of all was of course reserved for Marjorie herself. Its windows looked directly over Central Park, opening onto private terraces where she could enjoy the views by herself. Her private ensuite had been mostly reassembled from her previous mansion and included marble with a striking violet vein running through it. And in her dressing room, we can imagine her talking on the phone while her maid made sure Marjorie's hair and makeup were perfect before going out. As we venture up to the 3rd floor of the penthouse, we find that it was mostly reserved for their children. Their playroom opened onto a terrace with a private playground where the kids could swing above 5th Avenue. Marjorie's penthouse was more than a home, it was a symbol of her status and influence. As the owner of General Foods Corporation and the wealthiest woman in the United States, she led a life marked by luxury and philanthropy with a commanding view of New York City. This appetite for living at the top caught on for several reasons. The Jazz Age was in full swing, and there was a general sense that life should be about celebrating modern comforts and style. Owning or renting one of these skyline retreats meant you'd made it. You could throw legendary parties high above the city, and you had a private outdoor space, which is a precious commodity in any dense urban center. Real estate developers soon recognized that the top floors, once tough to sell, could be marketed as exclusive sanctuaries with commanding city views. The logic was simple. If people were willing to pay a premium for a penthouse's perks, why not turn more rooftops into dazzling apartments? This trend quickly spread out of Manhattan to other major American cities, especially Chicago. Among the earliest intentionally constructed penthouses was that of W.J. Moore in the Jackson Towers Apartments, which was completed by 1926. The entirety of the upper floors were designed for his mansion in the sky to have unobstructed views of the city in every direction. With nowhere to go but up, several of the rooms boasted double-height ceilings and were finished out by only the most talented artists. Just like in New York, his Chicago penthouse became a haven for his art and antique collections, a place where high society could gather in comfort with plenty of space to spread out. Over time, the penthouse idea showed up in films, advertisements, and magazines, solidifying its connection to wealth, glamour, and even celebrity culture. Socialites, business magnates, and Hollywood stars sought out these towering addresses, which only added to the feeling that living on the top floor was a sign of high social status. Developers kept pushing the limits, culminating in what we now see around the world, entire levels of skyscrapers devoted to lavish sky palaces with pools, private gyms, and wraparound balconies. A peek into this evolution reveals the way technology, economics, and social change can come together to reshape how we live. The next time you pass by a tall building with a lavish rooftop terrace, it's worth remembering that such spaces were once unthinkable. Now they're not just coveted by the wealthy, but also stand as reminders of a transformative moment in city living, when the elevator turned the world upside down and the top floors suddenly became the ultimate place to call home. And with that, I'll turn it over to you. Which of these early penthouses was your favorite? Or maybe something else stuck out to you. Either way, let me know down below in the comments section. And while you're there, make sure you're subscribed so you never miss an exciting episode of This House.